I'm David Holt, the mayor of Oklahoma City, America's 25th largest city. I was elected in 2018. Previous to that, I was born and raised here in Oklahoma City. I went through Putnam City schools, and after graduation in 97, I went to Washington, D.C. to attend college. I went to the George Washington University, got a degree in political science. I even, in my closing months of my education, I went to work. I first worked for the Speaker of the House. I was there for a little over a year. 9/11 happened during that time period, so it was a particularly interesting time to be in the U.S. Capitol. And then I went down to the White House, and I served President Bush for 2 years in his Office of Legislative Affairs. And at that point, I returned home to Oklahoma City. This was 2004. I had married my wife, Rachel, who I met at George Washington, and I felt like Oklahoma City was really on the verge of a new era, and I wanted to be a part of it. So I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I came back home. I managed what little effort was needed for President Bush's reelection in Oklahoma that year. And then I went to work for Mary Fallin, who was then the lieutenant governor, for about a year. And that's actually when I got the opportunity to come to City Hall. And that ultimately was sort of the most rewarding experience I'd ever had. And I came and became chief of staff to Mayor Mick Cornett, my predecessor as mayor of Oklahoma City. I served there for 5 years, and that's where I was when I was elected to the Oklahoma State Senate, representing parts of Northwest Oklahoma City. I served there for 8 years. In our forms of government, both at the state and local level, it tends to be viewed as a part-time job. At least it is paid that way. And so I have also worked the last few years for a family-owned investment company here in Oklahoma City named Hall Capital. And so I have sort of dual employment, and that's been the case specifically at Hall Capital since 2014. In 2018, I had the opportunity because my predecessor, Mayor Cornett, my former boss, Mayor Cornett, was running for governor to seek the office of mayor myself. And I had always enjoyed my time at City Hall, really above all else. And so I came back, I ran, and I was elected. And in regards to educational background, somewhere in there, I went to law school. I actually did it at night while I was working in the mayor's office the first time. And I graduated from Oklahoma City University with the JD. And so I've also worked in a few other places and wrote a book somewhere in there as well about the arrival of the NBA in Oklahoma City. But that's a quick snapshot of my career and educational background. You know, there's a lot of ways to get into public service. And if you were to study the lives of governors and mayors and congressmen and women and state legislators, you'd see a lot of different paths, you know. And some people, like, look at our current governor. He was entirely in the private sector, you know, being an entrepreneur until he decided to run for governor. Then you look at somebody like me. I've been in public service my whole adult life and worked in staff positions and in some campaign positions before ultimately running for office myself. So there's lots of ways to get there. If you wanted to follow my specific path, you know, I would recommend getting involved early, even during college. You know, take the opportunities to have internships in Washington or here in Oklahoma for a local congressional office or for a governor's office or a mayor's office. We have interns sometimes in our mayor's office. That's a great way to get some experience. Working on campaigns is another important thing. I mean, that's often a way that people get into politics. And you don't have to run for anything ever. You know, you could also, there's plenty of people who serve in staff positions, as I did for several years. They just keep doing that, you know, and they're kind of the man or woman behind the man or woman, you know, and so that's also a career path that you could have. But in my case, I felt like getting that experience would make me a better public servant. And obviously I got to work at every level of government by a relatively young age. I'd worked in the U.S. Capitol, the White House, the state capitol, and City Hall. And it certainly made me, I think, a better senator and a better mayor as a result. But I think just getting, you know, it's all about experience, like in every field. And so just taking those opportunities at the ground floor and not being in a rush and understanding that, you know, you're going to have to kind of pay your dues a little bit. But hopefully those dues are fun, and ultimately it'll hopefully lead you towards a path where you can ultimately maybe run for office yourself, if that's what you want to do. An interesting aspect of the American democratic system is that power is really broadly diffused across different branches, across different levels of government. And that can be frustrating for a resident because they may just want to have to talk to one person and they want that one person to be able to solve their problem immediately. And reality is, and this traces all the way back to 1776. The founders of this country created a system that is very deliberate. It is very inclusive of a process and discussion. And that means that everything is slower than you want it to be. And it also means that you really need to talk to the right person because the functions of government have been separated across many levels and across many branches. And so you're really wasting your energy and your time if you're talking to a mayor about Social Security, or you're talking to a governor about the local police department. And it doesn't necessarily feel that way in my impression, as I observe the interactions that constituents have with elected officials. They want to just talk to somebody important and then they want to kind of wash their hands of it. And unfortunately, it's just not going to be that easy. I mean, if you want to see change in government, you have to be persistent and patient. And if you are, you really will, I think, have the ability to influence things. I mean, I feel like I look at my whole life leading up to an initiative like MAPS 4. My whole life put me in a position where I could be the mayor and I could, lead the creation of and passage of $1 billion infrastructure initiative. But it took, in a sense, my own persistence and my own patience to walk that path over 15, 20 years where I could finally be in a position to have that kind of an impact. But even in a sense then, I still wasn't the dictator. I was still channeling the views of many other people who had spent many years advocating for different projects, advocating for different priorities for our city. So elected officials are people too. And if you wanted something out of your spouse or your parents or your friend, would you just scream at them and think that that is a effective way to arrive at the outcome you desire? Of course not, right? So I'm not sure where in the world people got the idea that elected officials are any different than their friends and their family. And when people yell at an elected official, or certainly yell to me, I'm done with them. I've got many other constituents who want to have more serious conversations and want to treat people with the respect that I want to give them. And I'm just going to go talk to those people. I'm not remotely impressed by the volume of your argument or the disrespectfulness of your argument. That doesn't speak to me. That doesn't show me how passionate you are. It shows me that you are not serious. It shows me that you're actually probably just doing this for attention that you perceive as somehow, positive towards you. I assure you it is not. You look just as foolish to everyone else as you do to me. And so I would encourage everybody to treat others as they wish to be treated. And most public officials are probably doing this for almost no pay, at least in Oklahoma, that's often the case. This truly is a public service. It's truly a public calling. We don't have an inordinate amount of power, and we certainly aren't doing it for the money. We're doing it to make our community better. And we could do other things and talk to other people. And so if you bring incivility, rudeness, aggressiveness into a conversation, you should expect to realize nothing that you wish to occur, just as you would think if you were talking to anybody else. Elected officials are human beings too. So this whole experiment that we've been engaged in since 1776 only works when we're civil to each other. And really, I could have extended that date back 10,000 years, because really, humanity, civilization, beyond the American experiment, only works if we find a way to coexist. So you need to bring that same attitude to political discussions if you expect to ever find any kind of path forward and to make any progress. If we're all just screaming at each other and being rude to each other and calling each other names, guess what? Nothing's going to happen. And that's not what any of us actually want. So let's work with each other. Let's be civil. And let's try to work through that conversation, because it might be a long one until we can finally find that common ground. But I truly believe there's always common ground to be found if you'll just give it a little effort. First of all, writing somebody who is actually your representative. You know, you're not going to have as much influence over somebody who is not your congressperson, who is not your state legislator, who is not your mayor. Again, it may be emotionally satisfying to fire off that email, letter, or tweet, but if they are not representing you, they're not motivated to follow your views. Maybe you have something profound to say and you think that this will be a new perspective that will help that person's thinking, I guess. But honestly, speaking as an elected official, you're obviously most motivated. You've probably heard all the perspectives at this point. You're mostly just trying to figure out what the majority of your residents, your voters think. And so we're going to kind of filter out everybody else. And so try to make it thoughtful, obviously try to be civil and all those things, and be personal. Sometimes when you're in elected office, you can sense that you actually start seeing like boilerplate language that's obviously being cut and pasted into many emails. And that's again, not as impactful to me if someone hasn't taken the time to actually, write it themselves. I will assume that they've been caught up in some sort of website where all they have to do is, click a button and maybe write their name and then they're done. And that doesn't speak to me that this person is actually all that passionate about the issue. The most impactful thing still, and maybe more so than ever, is an actual letter, an actual mailed letter, even a handwritten one, which I get from time to time, can be the most impactful, because then you really feel like this person, really, really feels passionately about this. And it kind of just gets your attention a little bit more.